Welcome back to the next episode. Last week we dismantled the engine, ready to get rebuilt, and this week we're going to be going through the carburetor. I'm going to fully disassemble this, explain each component, and then also show you using tools found in the garage how you can freshen it up quite easily and cheap. So let's get started. The steps we're going to follow today is we're going to fully dismantle the carburetor, and I'll point out what each part does. And on the top right of that green rag you can see that we've bought a carburetor kit. So we're going to swap out all the old parts and hopefully make it as good as new. But definitely stick around to the reassembly because we go through every part in detail as we're putting it together. Now we're undoing the body of the carburetor. So this is where all the fuel is held when it's put together, and underneath we'll have all the floats and the jets. As this is a 4-stroke bike, I wasn't expecting a build-off of gunk in the body, so it's as clean as I expected, which is good. Means there won't be any, shouldn't be any block jets. Now we're undoing the pipe in the main jet. The main jet on this bike is a 165, and you can see there's no blockages. So, as I said, as expected, the body didn't have a lot of gunk and oil build up in it because it's a 4-stroke, so I didn't really expect that to be blocked. Even though the main jet was very clean, the pilot jet's blocked, which is very interesting. This is the size 17.5, and I've ridden this bike for breaking it down, and once you held it past half throttle it would just bog itself down and flood. So I wonder if that has anything to do with it. So far, pulling everything apart, it's looking as usual. There's no markings on the valve or the needle. I'll definitely do a bit more talking once we put it back together, as we put each component in. But for now, I haven't seen any red flags in this Carby, except for maybe the pilot jet being blocked. Now that it's disassembled, we'll open up the carburetor kit, put it back together. So this kit I got off eBay, and yeah, it's got everything I need in it. It's got gaskets, it's got all the jets, the pilot screws, the fuel pump parts. Also comes with a lot of washers, O-rings, and the needle, everything you need really to rebuild the carburetor. And it was about $30 AUD, so very cost effective as well. But first, before we put it together, we're going to clean up the carburetor and make it look nice. So I've tried a couple different methods on another carburetor to see what would give the best results. I tried a wire brush and a drill, and that didn't actually get rid of the grind on it. These are made out of an aluminium magnesium alloy, and that's quite standard in this time period. And surprisingly, this WD-40 and the Scotch-Brite have been known to polish up aluminium, and I think that's why this works so well. I am very surprised that a wire brush and a drill with WD-40 didn't actually clean it, but this has, even just by hand. And as you can see, good as new. So we're going to continue this method the whole way around. We're going to use a mixture of Scotch-Brite, WD-40, and then for the tight to reach places, we're going to use a Dremel with a Scotch-Brite attachment on it. So for now, we'll just watch as we go. Realistically, I'm only scrubbing like less than 5 seconds, and this stuff's coming off. And this has been baked on for, I'd say, a couple of decades, so it's actually not too hard to do if you have a carburetor at home. Just get a Scotch-Brite, get some WD-40, and just do what I'm doing here. This is on ×3 speed, so yeah, it looks like 3 seconds on the screen, but it's really only 9 seconds in real life, which is quite quick. For this super tight spot here, I had to change the attachment on the Dremel to something a little smaller, and use it'll get rid of it. As you can see, it's spotless now, so I'm going to use this for the rest of the tight to reach spots on this cleanup. So this is the end result: Scotch-Brite, WD-40 and a Dremel attachment. I'm not going to show you the other side cleaning because it's the exact same. If you would like to see the repetitive things like that, let me know in the comments, but for now I'll just show you quickly how I do the body of the Carby, and then we'll get back to the reassembly of the carburetor. Now to start the assembly, I have to actually disassemble just a little bit more. Just have to get this slide detached so then I can access the needle, and we're going to swap it out with the needle from the kit. So as you can see, there's a clip on the end, and this is a way that you can control your air fuel mixture. As you put it up, it'll become more lean. As you put it down, it'll become more rich. But what I'm going to do now is just put the clip and the little O-ring on the new needle. They're identical. This one's just more gold, I'm guessing because it hasn't been worn or used at all yet. And we're just going to put it back in the way that it came out and start the process of assembly. So this needle is super important to make sure it's in spec. On the screen is a diagram of how each component in the carburetor responds to the throttle opening. And because the needle sits in the main jet, if that's out of spec, as you go into full throttle, the bike will not respond properly. And maybe that's a reason why it didn't do that before. But as you can see, the needle clip position also has a massive effect. And then you've got the other things like the jet needle and the air screw mixtures. But you know, it just shows how all important all these components are, because they all affect different parts of the acceleration throttle opening. So earlier when we took out the air screw mixture and the jet pilot was blocked, that's going to really affect like that quarter to mid-range throttle response. So at this point I'm just aligning the slide to go in the right direction in the chamber of the carburetor. Usually they'll have a little divot on the side of it, and then there'll be a mechanism where it can only slide in one direction. So you might need to twist it clockwise or counterclockwise until it slides down to the bottom. Now that we've locked on the throttle lever, you just want to check that it can open and close under its own, spring as it is there. Because if it doesn't close, then you've got even bigger issues. Now we're going to put the idling screw in. So this will just push against the throttle lever, and it pretty much just replicates if you were opening the throttle, but instead of it closing all the way back when you let go, it just keeps it like 1/8 open, just enough for the bike to idle by itself. Here, before I put on the top, we're just going to get rid of the old gasket. I'm going to get a gasket scraper at some point, but for now this little knife works just to remove it. I'm being very light with these scratches. It's important to have the gaskets in good condition because they're going to create an airtight vacuum inside the carburetor, so therefore all of the air fuel systems are going to work optimally. Now we're going to put on the throttle bracket. So this is where the opening and closing cables will sit, and they will, control the throttle lever to open it up the slide or close the slide. Now we're putting the choke back in. The choke's really useful when the engine's cold. What it does is it shuts off an air valve. And sorry, before we get going, you need to make sure that the spring and this ball bearing will sit underneath where the lever of the choke sits. But back to what I was saying, see that little gap on the side? I'm going to put a little arrow there. That's just going to close it, which will stop more air getting into the engine, which will create a higher fuel air mixture. So when it's cold, there'll be more fuel going into the engine and it will start better. And that's why the bike doesn't rev up as well once it's warm and the choke's still on, because there's still too much fuel going to the engine. So this is super important for starting the bike. And as you can see on the side there, as I open and close it, now we're going to put the new main jet into the pipe. Now the old jet wasn't blocked, but there's no harm in putting in a brand new jet. So what you want to make sure is that that pipe goes over the needle, and then you just put it in. So not too hard to put these things in, and then just tighten it up afterwards. Here are the two pilot jets, and this one is not blocked. So what you want to do is put this all the way in, and then that's it. There's really no adjustment on this one. Now for the air fuel screws, these will have the biggest impact in the low throttle opening. So you want to put this all the way in and then take it out 1.5 rotations. And this is something that you'll adjust with altitude. So for example, if you go up 500 meters in altitude, you may have to adjust this out by another half a screw, because this will change the air fuel mixture. So you'll need more air because there's less air at altitude. So this is something that you'll need to change according to altitude. And luckily, because it sits on the outside, it's quite easy to get to. You don't have to pull apart the Carby. So now we're going to put in the new float and needle, and the last float was that O-ring was completely worn. It came out super easy, so I'd say that it would have leaked over time. I found the best way to put it in is just to hammer it with a socket. Don't want to hammer it too hard, but just enough that it starts tapping in evenly, and then we'll put together the needle and the float positions from here. So it's easier to attach the needle onto the float and then put it in than it is to try and line up that little flap with the needle head whilst it's in. So just put it on the float and then put it together. That'll save you a heap of time. So the floats are super important. You want to make sure that these work, because what happens is as the fuel comes into the body of the Carby, the fuel level will rise those floats, and then it will push against the needle. And once it hits a certain level, that needle will actually block the fuel flow. So then no more fuel will come into the carburetor. So if you're finding that your carburetor is leaking fuel out of the overflow, that's because your floats aren't set up correctly, and the needle's not stopping the influx of fuel coming into it. Again, and this is probably most important in the body, you want to make sure that that gasket's there, because you don't want fuel leaking out. Now this is a fuel pump, has a diaphragm, a couple of springs, and it attaches to the throttle lever. Now I'm not exactly sure what this does or how this works on this bike, because I'll put a diagram up shortly. I don't have the attachment to connect it to the throttle lever, and I couldn't find them online anywhere. But this project is done now, and the bike runs fine, so I don't actually know how useful this is. If someone could tell me in the comments, I'd love to know actually, because I'd just love to learn about it. But I'll put the diagram up now to show you what part I'm referring to. But yeah, this is the fuel pump. Still not sure exactly what this does. But as you can see on the diagram, there would be a rod that connects the lever to that throttle lever. So that's the first half of it, but I don't have the second half that would connect it. But the bike runs fine, so I'm not really too stressed that I don't have that second part. But thanks for watching. This is how, we took this old worn Carby, disassembled it, cleaned it, rebuilt it into a carburetor that looks nice and fresh. So if you enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe and follow the project. We'll be doing a couple more videos before we do the final reveal, and we'll see you next video.